Hi everybody, and welcome to Module 3 of Education 605, Inclusion of Students with Special Needs. So, I don't really have much humor to kick off this week. The 50-mile-an-hour winds that we had a couple days ago, thankfully were not on a recycling day. A few years ago, our neighbor decided to put out all of his recycling when there was a wind warning, and that morning for 3 city blocks it was just covered with all kinds of cans and bottles and whatever and paper. And so the good news is he went out and cleaned everything up, but I was kind of thinking, dude, no, don't put it out, it's never gonna work. So it's been a good week. This upcoming week I enter spring break, and my doctoral dissertation is due to my editor on Easter. So I will be working pretty much nonstop from now until Easter. It's about 230 pages without the references and appendices. And on May 2nd, that I officially defend my dissertation at UW-Madison, and then should have my Ph.D. in educational leadership and policy analysis. So it's been a long process, but very, very worth it. So, but yes, my spring break is going to be many, many cups of coffee and, probably some Mountain Dews, whatever it takes. But yes, it's going to be nonstop. I want to give some shout outs. The first shout out is going to be to Abby. Abby, you talked about Rose's birthday party and how other peers helped her participate in the party. And you talked about the jump rope where they helped so she could manipulate the jump rope and be a part of that. I thought that was really a neat point for you to bring out from the reading. And those types of special accommodations happen, very, very often, and we sometimes just don't even recognize them. I don't know if it's in this reading, if it's in this course, or if it was in a different course. But I'm going to share a story, and if I've shared it already, please forgive me. But a few years ago, I was at a conference, and a father, probably about my age, had a daughter with cerebral palsy, and she was maybe freshman, sophomore in high school. And her dad, her mom and dad were both, very caring people, wanted the best for her, this girl. Actually, I think she was a little bit younger. I think probably, maybe like probably 7th grade, something like that. Well, anyway, the parents were hosting a birthday party, and a few of this girl's friends came over and met with the parents. And so it's the dad who's presenting at this conference. The dad is doing this presentation, and he said, "Oh, there's a knock at the door, and these 2 girls who are friends of our daughter, come in, and here's what they were telling us." I said, "We really like Sherry, and we always have, and you're having this birthday party for her, but you dress her in sweatpants. Granted, like running pants, they're cool, but you do things that are kind of convenient, but not really things that are stylish. And we would like to kind of give her a makeover, and we would like to tape, at that time, I don't know, NSYNC or whatever pictures onto her wheelchair. There was a tray on the front, and then put clear like shelf liner over the top of it. And we want to kind of trick out her hair with some different highlights and do her nails. And then they said, why don't you look for a pair of jeans? You know, something that would be kind of cool that and you know that she would like, and you know, a top. And so anyway, the parents went out, and the dad was saying how they got her these jeans, and they were and the daughter just loved them, and they were all bedazzled up. You probably remember at that time uh, the commercial with the bedazzler, and pants in stores typically had all those rhinestones and stuff on the back pockets, but this girl loved it, and they got her you know, just stuff that was age appropriate, and the friends did the makeover. So and this girl, you know, had a wonderful party, and the thing that the dad talked about at this conference was, he said, you know, my wife and I never thought about this. We just never saw her growing up, um, and you know, the typical things that a girl her age would be doing and interested in. We always just kind of, you know, followed day after day what we were kind of used to. And he said, boy, this was the greatest thing for her friends to come and talk to us about this, because yeah, it made total sense. And that's why he came to this conference and gave this presentation. And it was part of the audience with included parents with students with disabilities. And of course, his message, you know, was, you know, remember you know, your 15-year-old is still a 15-year-old, and they, you know, they're gonna want to be hip, and you know, your, you know, 10-year-old might want to have a Packers jersey or something like that. I mean, just those types of things. And I remember talking, or at the end of his presentation, he talked about then another family where it was a boy, and then he kind of tricked out his wheelchair, or had, you know, the family did it in like a Packer logo type thing on the wheels, and it was just like really cool, because the kid was a big fan. Anyway, that reminds me of the Rose story, and Abby, your comment about the jump rope kind of brought me to that. Katie, the timeline that you put together, awesome. Terrific selection of photos to support, to build a context. And you know, you brought up immigrants, and I did make a comment on this. And I, you know, I think we overlooked that around 1900, there was a huge kind of push out of public education in basically, you know, like 1 through 8, that you would go to elementary school, and that the populace would have a basic education that would then enable them to, um, you know, participate not only in the workforce, but to understand the basic civic expectations of being an American. So that did a lot to push out education. And then I did like that in the 1980s you posted not only the support to inclusion, but also the opposition to inclusion. And to note that that exists to this day. Um, there are school districts right around where I'm located, and it has not been uncommon for a board member to make a statement such as, you know, we spend way too much money on students with disabilities, and we're not getting a return, and we need to cut costs in this area. Um, and wow, you know, that really creates a polarized environment. Um, and typically those statements are said without the knowledge of what what the services are, you know, what the requirements of the law are. It's really, you know, largely done looking off of numbers. And yeah, I mean, some of those costs can be expensive, but that's why we have public education. That's why we have IDEA. And as a community, as individuals, we need to support that just unconditionally. And if that was my brother, if that was my daughter, um, you know, would I be coming, you know, at that board meeting and making that same statement? You know, absolutely not. So But you're right, it exists to this day, especially as resources become scarce. People look all over for different ways to consolidate budgets. So, we have to be very vigilant on preserving inclusion, and also in a sense that we are meeting the needs of students with disabilities and not just setting up a mainstreaming environment. Aaron, you mentioned the revolving door of special education aids. Yes, I have been there as a director, and very frustrating to have that happen. Very understandable though, because typically aides aren't compensated very well, and they don't receive much training. And when an aide is hired, they're typically assigned to the most challenging student. So, it's no wonder why that door keeps revolving. Um, I also work in a district that started to shift aides quite rapidly to meet the dynamic demands of buildings. So, if a student moved from out of a building, or if a building had a little bit of a change in population, then an aide that was at one elementary might get moved over to this other elementary for part of her day and whatever. The problem with that was that it started to happen way too rapidly. So, I mean, you could be an aide and literally be shifted 3-4 times throughout the school year. And aides just, didn't want to do that. And it wasn't in the best interest of the building. It takes an aide a while to learn the building, to learn the teachers, the expectations of that building, of that teacher, holistically, the students. So bad model. Um, what we need to do flat out is we need to have an induction program for special education aides, meaning that when they come in, they receive kind of a crash course, but at least some professional development in the district initiatives, and then also in the population of students they'll be working with. If it's autism, or emotional behavioral, learning disability, whatever it is, or high needs medical. And once that's done, then that person starts in and should have a mentor. Also, it's a lot to ask, but if we really want to fix the problem of the revolving door, um, and put hinges on that door, this is how we do it. And support staff should have access to professional development. They should be attending conferences and being able to stay after school for some PLCs and for some workshops. Again, those are dollars. I understand that. I went back and did a study one year of all of the aides that we had lost, and then the cost to recruit new aides and pay for licensing and all of that. And, made a strong argument for, we're spending a lot of money to keep this crazy process going of just people in and out, versus if we did more of an effort to maintain our staff, or retain our staff, I should say, it would be the same cost, so. But thanks for bringing that up. That can become very frustrating for inclusion, especially when an aide gets to know a student or students and how to support those students in an inclusive setting, and then suddenly, that aide is gone. So then the students have to learn and acclimate to somebody else, and someone else has to learn the students and the teacher and so forth. Teresa, you posted a question about funding for schools and for special education. And one of the things, there should be much more transparency in how funding occurs. And I don't really talk about it too much in this class. I do have a pupil services non-discrimination class, which is more like a law class for special ed directors that I teach. And in that one, we get into funding. But I do think it's a relevant point that you put out there of how is special education funded. Well, the state gives a set amount of money for every student that attends a school, So whether that amount is, let's just say $5,000 or $6,000, then the district itself will impose a tax levy, so that we all pay property taxes, and that fills in additional dollars. So most districts, would pay somewhere in the range of $9,000 to $12,000 per student. I mean, it can range, it can vary. I think the high is like 20,000. I think the low would probably be about 8, but um, that's typically the cost. Now that's a little bit ambiguous to look at, because if the district also has debt that they are paying off for school buildings and things like that, that's going to make that number look higher. So, like in my community, we have no debt. All of the school facilities are paid off, so we have a relatively low cost per student. But the reason that is one, we have a large tax base to spread across, and second is we don't have debt payments that we're making. So, but the federal government, when special education started, said, hey, we were going to fund special education 100%. That never happened. At one point, what was happening is, so a special education teacher, the state would be reimbursing the district, I think at most, when it started, about 70% of the cost of that person's salary and fringe. And now it's down to like about 25%. And there's a set amount of money. So if there's more claims that come in, then that percentage drops. So it's not like you can suddenly hire, 5 more staff and get this extra money. Districts also receive money often through Medicaid claiming, Medicaid billing, and if that includes attendant care and transportation, that can be a pretty large amount of money that comes back to the district as a reimbursement. So in my last district, we could easily generate, we had a district of about 3,500 students, we could generate about $400,000 in Medicaid reimbursement from the federal government. So that's kind of a source. And one of the things too with aids, a district, if a aid is used for attendant care services, or written as needing to be there in the IEP to provide medical services to the student, or to provide, if it's behavioral supports or whatever it is, you have to look into this a little bit more, but through attendant care, part of that aids, you get part of that aid's cost back in reimbursement. So really the cost of the aid can be fairly low. I mean, so if the aid costs you $12 an hour, let's say, once you get your Medicaid billing back, if that aid gives attendant care, the reality is that aid might cost you $7 an hour. So, but there are districts that just also don't look into that as deeply as they need to. And I think if they scrutinize that a little bit more, there is not a cap on that. I mean, with the feds, that can go, that's limitless. You just have to meet the criteria. And then the state gives a certain amount for every special education student. Now, if you have a student with very, very severe medical needs, or a student that has speech language services for 20 minutes once a week, you get the same amount of money. And it's a set amount, I don't know, like $1,500, $1,700. It changes, but that's what you get. So you take your number of students identified with disabilities, multiply it by that number, and that's what you have. And then if you have private schools within your district, then those private schools do get a portion of that funding too. But so anyway, that's kind of in a nutshell how some of that funding works. But I think it was a very good question, and it's one where, yeah, it was a promise from the feds to give funding for special education, and a promise that just was never upheld. And we have less and less dollars that are supporting special education, although the mandates haven't changed. So let's do a recap. First of all, Roe, very moving story of self-advocacy, and just how her peers supported her, and also just promoted her independence and accepted her for her, I mean, for Roe. So, wonderful, wonderful story. And so many of you wrote the impact that it had on you. I appreciate the effort with the timelines. Actually, okay, so today is March 13th. I have my green sweatshirt on, or not March, sorry, March 17th, it's St. Patrick's Day. So I have my green sweatshirt on, which I wore to work today because it's one of the few things I have which is green, and this thing was way, way too hot. And I had no backup plan, so I had to make it through the day in this thing which is incredibly, incredibly warm. So bad move. I will have to come up with something better for next St. Patrick's Day. But nice work on the timelines and discussion about the timelines. But I thought it was important for us to look at the timelines to get a grasp of efforts toward inclusion started when the country was first founded. And it's amazing, people don't think back that far. And even some of the very significant changes that have happened, just recently, with IDEA and then also with ADA accessibility so there's been, within the last 5 years, some additional, um, legislation that's come out for students with disabilities and their access to sports. So. But the timelines, I think, give a context as we move now forward into our next module. And the reading, why is it okay to pull out a child with a disability, and then we had a question with that. We don't do it for a student of a specific race or anything else. So why a student with a disability? I think very, very thought-provoking. And personally, I just think the Pullup model is past due. It's lived its life. The push-in model is what will be prevalent going forward. It doesn't mean, again, that we limit the idea and say we have to have full inclusion 100% of the time, because that's not IDEA. But we should be going toward push-in services. I do 80% at least of my services in speech and language as push-in, and I co-teach. I co-teach a high school math class. I co-teach folk ed. I co-teach physical education, and I'm just present in many other classes. Doing dual therapies with orientation and mobility and early childhood. So, but yeah, my office is empty most of the time because I am out and about, working in rooms with students, and I think that's really where we're going to see the future of special education, if it's not there already in your district. Let's look ahead to Module 3. So Module 3 talks about in a few things. One is inclusion in the other kids, and it separates out perception versus fact. The perception is, if inclusion brings down a class as far as students who have more higher aptitude. Once you include students with learning disability, then their performance is brought down. Research has not supported that at all, and just the impact of having students in a class with disabilities has this negative impact, and in some cases it could if the student is violent, but in most cases it just broadens the empathy and broadens the diversity of that class. I mean, think about, what if a class has a student that moves in who's the English language learner who speaks 4 words of English? I mean, it's, is that a case where that student then is compromising the learning of the rest of the class? So, but yet that argument is made a lot, and that was always one that would grind at me, because it's one of those things where I kind of look at people when they say things like that, and just wish that they would think a little bit more before they would ask that question. The other part I want to hit on is in Module 3 we talk a lot about school community and the importance of building that school community, building connectedness, building culture, and all wraps around with inclusion, feeling like you're included. In 2009, the Centers for Disease Control released a report on school connectedness and basically said the number one factor in a student being successful by various metrics such as attendance, grades, not engaged in smoking and alcohol and so forth as they get older. But the number one factor was connectedness, whether they felt connected to their school, to the teachers and to other students. That was it, number one. So I have a video that's a couple years old. I interviewed a teacher who went to China and spent a year there, and we talk about his experiences with inclusion. I did talk to him about a year ago, and what you will see in the video is still pretty accurate. He has had a number of friends who have taught in China, and he's been in contact with them. But the video is pretty amazing because he was very instrumental in having the first student with a disability included in a school in this area where he was teaching. Students with disabilities are not accepted into schools in China. Even if you are a very powerful person in the government, it doesn't make a difference. You cannot buy your way into a school. Greg, who I interviewed in this, we had a discussion. I don't think it's in the recording, but the discussion was, what if a family had $1 million and they came to the school and said, we will pay for the teacher, we will pay for the aide, all of the transportation, all the materials, whatever, plus we will pay you this stipend on top of that so our child can access the school. The answer in China still would be no. It's just such a strong cultural belief. And that just amazed me. But yeah, it is. And autism isn't recognized. It's not diagnosed. So when you look at what is diagnosed, it's very narrow as far as how. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Of course, it's not diagnosed. Doctor will look, examine, but there's a stigma to that come out and diagnose a child with a disability versus, as Greg told me, kind of just to give antibiotics to treat anything. Imagine antibiotics treating autism. Crazy. But watch the video. And together we learn better. And absolutely true. I want to give a little short story to kind of close us off for today. But in one of the high schools I worked with, they had a gay straight alliance, which was pretty powerful, and there were a number of other clubs, such as I think like the Latino leaders and whatever. But there were these different kind of fragmented diversity type clubs, and and they were all very proper and had solid membership. But it was interesting because what happened at the school is that the GSA, which was the largest and most powerful of all of the clubs, basically came to the conclusion that having all of these other clubs just splintered and created a splintered message of diversity. And even GSA itself looked and said, we're much more than a gay straight alliance. We're here to promote an inclusive environment so any student that moves to our district and any student who's in our district feels welcome. And yeah, gender one thing, but whether they're rich, poor, what their interests are, it doesn't matter. And they got really defensive on this point, and they sat down and were able to negotiate with the other clubs and basically kind of dissolve all of those clubs and then recreate a single diversity club, which was amazing. And they did it because they said this makes more sense. And um, so yeah, everybody was able then, because they all kind of had the same missions, that they really weren't so much advocating like the Latino leaders for themselves. They were advocating to make the path easier for the next person to come into the school, to lessen the chances of, discrimination or something like that. So when you got down to kind of the mission statements of these clubs, they were all pretty much the same, and they were trying to accomplish the same things. So yeah, it was a powerful thing to watch. And I remember it was an 18-year-old senior boy that kind of led the charge on this. And he was articulate, really, really skilled, and just bringing everybody on board with him. And kudos, it was really an awesome thing to see. And it didn't devalue any of the other clubs. It created this completely new entity, where, yeah, everybody was supported and embraced. So it was really something. So that's it for tonight. So yes, St. Patrick's Day. The leprechaun did visit our school today, stayed out of my office, which was a very good move for a leprechaun. However, did tip over a chair in the first grade room and sprinkled popcorn all over the floor. Let's see, that is it. So with the shout outs, if I don't mention your name, it doesn't mean you had a bad week. I just try to highlight three or four people. I could highlight all of you. You're doing a great job. I will post updated grades probably sometime in the next few days, just to give you again kind of a landscape of where I'm at. I'm closing out a different class for Viterbo, Pupil Services Non-Discrimination, on Saturday, and that is 18 students, a big class. And then from Saturday to Easter, I am probably working a ton on wrapping up my dissertation so I can get it to my editor. So it doesn't mean I'm not going to be accessing class and everything, but it does mean probably in the next week I'm not going to quite be here as much participating as most weeks. So if you do see a day when I'm not on or something, it doesn't mean I haven't logged in and checked the class. It just means I might be shooting something back and forth between my editor and just need to get it done. Just some weird timing that goes on. But hey, after we hit Easter, we are in smooth sailing. So have a wonderful Easter, and for those of you that have spring break, enjoy it. Doesn't look like it's going to be that warm, but a good chance to spend some time with family and start to do a little spring cleaning, get things ready for hopefully our 70 and 80 degree days, which will be here by the time we hit our final module. So again, take care. Thank you very much, and happy St. Patrick's Day. And also, hope the leprechaun left you alone today too. Bye.